Okay, it's 11:30. Welcome everyone to Media Over QUIC Session 1. As always, this session is being recorded. As always, we have a local sports mascot, and today's mascot is Youppi, mascot of the much missed Montreal Expos and now the Montreal Canadiens. This is the IETF note well. You've been here for a day already, most of you, so you've probably already been told that this is a new note well. I don't think it's a revolutionary change to what there was before.
Can you maybe get a little closer to the mic? You could be louder.
Okay, I'm just going to take this out. As I was saying, this is the note well. It is new and revised. I don't think it's a revolutionary change in what the note well used to say, but it has been refreshed for modern times. It, as always, talks about intellectual property implications to you being here, as well as the code of conduct. Please review it if you've not already. Here's some resources for 124. Most of you probably already found these already. If you do have any technical problems, please use the issues path right there. I think everyone's familiar with Miracle by now. Use the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen, or at I think the top of the screen of the remote client of the light client, if you want to enter the queue. If you are in the full client on a laptop here in the room, please mute your speaker, or else we will get feedback. Those of you who are out remotely, you should probably use a headset. Thank you, Emily and Yequi, for agreeing to scribe and saving us all a bunch of uncomfortable staring. This is the agenda for today. This is mostly mock transport focused issues that we hope will foster some discussion in sidebar conversations. And then here's what we have tomorrow, which is mostly but not entirely other drafts. Also some fairly provocative things, and there's a small chance we get to some of the parking lot issues. We'll see how things evolve. Would anyone like to bash the agenda? Okay. We've adopted 2 drafts since last IETF, both security related, a second authorization method, as well as C4M. Okay, we have many things scheduled between now and IETF 125. We typically run a consensus call every draft on the diff between the current draft and the previous one, so that is ongoing. Deadline you see there is November 10th for the draft 15 diff, and our general principle is that once those have been, if you have a problem, file an issue against it in GitHub, and we are somewhat less forgiving of issues filed against something after the consensus has been called. A bunch of virtual interims, basically every other Monday at 1700 UTC for 90 minutes, where we mostly talk about mock transport topics. We will have a online interop sometime probably in December. Mike English is studiously working on finding that date, and we might have it to announce on Thursday with luck. And we've confirmed our hybrid interim in February. We're going to flip the usual order. The first 2 days are going to be issue discussion, and then we're going to have about a day and a half of interop in Boulder, Colorado. So this is adjacent to the Mile High Video meeting, which happens the week before, which is why we're flipping the order. Then there's one last virtual interim, and then the draft deadline for IETF 125. Now, I would like to very quickly ask a question. It's your first opportunity to use the Miracle tool. The last thing that O shouldn't be there. Sorry, I can't spell. Magnus and I are trying to get a sense of whether it's a good use of IETF resources to actually have an in-person meeting. We will also ask this question on the list. We're not asking for a commitment or for you to show us your airline tickets, but if you sort of expect to go, please say yes. That's fine too. We're just trying to say again. This is in the Meet Echo tool.
I see some people furiously signing in. You might want to give folks an extra minute.
Yep. We will just wait until the numbers stop climbing. Some people are vacillating. Is that a bug?
You can change your vote all the way until the end of the poll.
And people are taking advantage of that opportunity. Does anyone, I'm not sure what's happening with the jitter on this. Does anyone need more time? Please raise your hand, either in the tool or in person here. Okay, I'm going to stop it. Let's please let the record show that 17, shoot. I'm going to call it 17 people said yes, 43 said no, 5 said no. So it's 17, 43, and 5. Magnus and I will review these numbers and talk about it. We might send out a message to the list and then make a decision about what to do based on that. Thank you. That is the last slide. Our first presentation is, I believe, Alan for the mock transport update.
Ooh, I have the clicker. Okay. All right. We've been busy. We've published 2 draft versions since we had a big meeting like this in Madrid. I lumped them all into one presentation, then got feedback. Someone wanted to see which ones were in draft 14 versus draft 15. And so you will see they are demarcated. Where do I point this thing to actually make it go? Do I have to push the power button?
It should be on. It's on. Is it not working?
Can you just drive? Sorry. I was excited briefly. All right. Okay, so we don't change the object model all that much, but we made a couple of minor adjustments. So when you send an end of group status or end of track status object, you cannot put extensions on that. If you really need to send extensions, just send another empty object before that and add the extensions there. I will note there's a PR that's open that does a couple minor refinements to object status, which was something that Victor presented on in Toronto. And you can look at those details in 1342. And then we also explained how you can resume publishing after you lose state in a way that's compatible with the object model, which was something that was one of our oldest issues and is now closed. Next slide. Protocol negotiation and setup. So we finally merged our PR that lets you negotiate MOQ using ALPN, MOQ versions, and removed version negotiation from setup. This was blocked on there being at least one browser that had implemented WT available protocols in web transport. So thank you to Chrome for doing that. And if you work on the web transport implementation of another browser, please implement WT available protocols. And there's now a parameter and setup where you can there's a user agent like thing. It's basically just who are we supposed to call when there's a bug. So feel free to just put your phone number. Next slide. Changes in the control plane. So we had a big paramarama. We moved a number of fixed fields in messages and put them into key value pairs in parameters. And I listed out all the parameters that were moved there. This is all in 15. It's a fairly, I'm not sure very many people have gotten around to implementing it yet, but I think it's going to be, there's a little bit of churn there. There is now a single request error message. There used to be 6. They all had the same format, so we just consolidated it down to 1. There's also one for request OK, but it only applies to 3 of the messages. There's 3 others that have some fixed fields that make them different in subscribe, fetch, and publish OKs. Subscribe updates now have acknowledgements. So when you send a subscribe update, you will receive a request OK or a request error in return if the publisher liked your update or not. And there was some renaming that was done. We talked about that happened in 14. We changed announce to be called published namespace, and what used to be called subscribe done is now called publish done. Cullen, clarifying question?
Look, you can decide whether it's clarifying or not. And if it's not clarifying, you can be like, we'll take that later. Totally fine.
Okay.
So this was way back on the user agent stuff.
Okay, you want to go back one?
Didn't we basically figure out that in every protocol we've ever done this in, it is used by these servers to differentiate service for different versions of clients, and that turns out to be bad interop over the long run? Like, I thought we'd fairly firmly determined this was not a best practice at IETF. I mean, so my question is like, could you say a bit more about the logic of why we decided to do that or not do that? Was really
I mean, I think the reason is like when you start to deploy this at large scale and you see bugs, you're like, oh, that's weird. Like, I'm getting a ton of errors. Where are they coming from? And being able to group your logs and saying like, oh, all of the protocol violations are coming from, I don't know, who am I going to throw under the bus? Google Quiche. You're like, oh yeah, I'm going to go call Martin and tell him to fix this bug. You should just put Martin, just put the developer's name in there. And in terms of like, are you going to differentiate server behavior based on this? I will say I have done this in my HTTP implementation, largely to work around bugs in, Chrome, when it wasn't speaking HTTP2 properly. And so like, until they had a bug fix, we still had a service to run. And yes, we were like, yes, if you announce Chrome version 43, like we're not gonna, these messages will be processed differently because I know you're sending them wrong, but I want my users to be happy.
Okay, so look, I think that that you sort of hit at a key point of this is that presumably your code turned that off when it detected it was Chrome 44 or whatever, right? Like, but we don't really.
You mean, is that code still there?
So, well, that's the problem is when you remove this code, right? And so if that's the use case, I think that maybe we should just talk a little bit more about also having version, like now we're back to the version of the client, not just who to call if there's a problem, right? So, yeah.
Okay. Yes, we did.
So I'm way out of clarifying question.
Okay, we're off clarifying question. I want to go on, but I will just say we did discuss making it structured so that you could have version information in there as well. And I think the working group felt that there was not consensus at this time to do that. But if you want to open an issue, go ahead.
Yeah, Colin, it would be great if you filed an issue about this.
Okay, moving right along. We did this slide, unless somebody has control plane. Okay, more things. So new features in the control plane. When you subscribe to an entire namespace, you can now specify the forward parameter to be 0 or 1. And this gives you an option to sort of whether you want to actually be immediately subscribed to all of the tracks that are there. If you say 1, then not only will the subscriptions show up, but objects will be forwarded before you have a chance to say yay or nay, at least initially. This is something that's likely to change. We've formed a filter design team at our last hybrid interim, and they will give a presentation later. So wouldn't necessarily expect this is in the final form, but this is a change. There's now a special thing called new group request. So a subscriber can ask for a new group. The publisher of the track has to explicitly opt into this behavior. So if you are broadcasting the Super Bowl, you're just not going to support dynamic groups because you don't want all the millions of subscribers to be asking for them. That's just churn and noise. But if you are in a media conference of some kind, then it makes a lot of sense to do this. So there's sort of a way to opt in and opt out. Relays have some special deduplication logic to make sure that if multiple people are asking for a new group, that the publisher only sees one. Do you need something? No. Okay. And we now let you, it used to be that when you could only narrow a subscription, now you can also widen the end of it. And there's an open PR that will let you widen the beginning, at least as far back as largest. And if the current version of 1323 actually does not put a limit on it. So it hasn't landed yet, but opine there if you like. Next slide. Changes in the data plane. Most of these are all features that are related to compressing things in the data plane. So object IDs, when they come in the same subgroup, are now delta encoded. So it eliminated a range of invalid encodings and uses less space. We're also going to make the same change probably to key value pairs. So extensions and parameters. Take a look at 1315 if you're interested. Publisher priority. So if the publisher wants to set a priority as sort of the default for all objects on the track, it can do that when it establishes the subscription, and then it can omit the priority in the data plane. This has a 14 next to it, but that's a mistake. It was added in 15. You can also optimize out object IDs if you're using a single datagram per group, and that reduces the minimum overhead of a datagram. The MOQ overhead in a datagram is now 3 bytes. I don't think we can make it any smaller. We also made a significant change to how fetch streams work in 15. It dramatically reduces the metadata, and basically there's a 1 byte flags field that comes and tells you which fields are just the same as the previous or the previous +1. We are running out of data plane compression ideas. Maybe we're done. Hopefully we're done. If you have one, if you can think of one, file your issue soon. Next slide. Immutable extensions. I think we talked about this in Madrid. This has been merged, so there's a new mechanism so you can use and you can. Ooh, I lost my confidence monitor. I have no confidence. All right, I'm gonna see if we can do it from. Can you guys see it? You guys can. The immutable extensions are a place where you can put things that are included in your end-to-end authentication scheme where the relays are guaranteed not to play with it. So the bytes will be exactly as the publisher set them so that they can be input to your AAD. Yeah, and then there's you'll see a presentation, I think, in the next session of MOQ about secure objects, which talk about how to have private extensions, which are ones that are actually encrypted, not just authenticated. Okay, of course. Can you move to the next slide, Magnus? Or okay, modularity and relay handling. So applications are now official, we added language to the draft that you can just implement the subset of MOQ that makes sense for you. But if you are a relay with a capital R, then you have to implement all the messages and you have to implement there's rules in the relay section that tell you what you're supposed to do. That includes, you have to be able to support more than one concurrent publisher for the same track or the same namespace. We added logic about if you're doing a fetch, you can pick any one of the publishers. They all have to have the same information. Relays don't generally end their subscriptions based on filters, and we clarified how the namespace prefix matching works. Next slide. You got me, Martin? Yeah. Okay. I think we're getting close. Okay. This is as of when I submitted my slides, which was a few days ago, but it's in about the ballpark of where things are in the issue count. So we have 122 open issues, which is not the number I would like to see. And we break it down into these categories. So ones that we don't really think are related to transport, ones that were parked, we're waiting to work on later, ones that have PRs, ones that are purely editorial, ones that we have made a decision what to do, we just haven't written the text yet, ones that need discussion and new issues that need to be triaged. Next slide. So what would this call to action for you? This is the last slide anyway. Good job. So if you own or not transport issue, consider closing it and tracking that information elsewhere. There's not anything in the draft that we can do to help you. Please review the open PRs. We would like to merge them soon. Except for some very tricky editorial issues, we would welcome an editorial PR from anyone. If you're looking to contribute, go scan that list of 36, find something that suits you, and please put up a PR. We've gotten some contributions in the last couple months from people, newcomers who have done great editorial work. We really appreciate it. We have a lot of work to do. And then for the 14 issues that are in discussion, review them at any time and add your asynchronous opinion. We will continue to discuss those in hybrid interims. And please don't file any more issues.
we are a little bit ahead of schedule if anyone wants to have a question or comment for Alan. If not, thank you. Next up is Mo to talk about the filter design team progress.
Okay, so in the Toronto interim, we had some discussions about the object filter PRs and also a new proposal for track selection filters. And all the comments around both of those were mostly positive. People wanted to see this being supported, but it seemed like it was going to be not so simple. So we decided to set up a design team for it. We've had several meetings. We had a meeting in Toronto, impromptu, at the very end of the interim. And then we had several follow-on meetings with the design team. If anyone is interested in continuing to follow that design team and contribute, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll get you included in those talks. But we're presenting what we've sort of converged on now. It's not fully finalized, but I think all of the big blocks are already in place. So we'll start with the easy stuff, which is the setup negotiation. And then we'll go on to talk about the object filter, which was the first proposal in Toronto, and then the track selection filter, which was a new proposal in Toronto that was seen for the first time by most people. And then finally go on to the open issues that we're still iterating on in the design team. Okay, so the easy part is the setup negotiation. While everyone saw the utility in these filters, there was concern that maybe there's complexity for relays to always support these because it may impact their computational requirements as they're processing objects in the data plane. There's some more checks that they have to do, and if they're trying to have a very highly optimized forwarding data plane, there may be some complexity in supporting all of these filtering operations. And so there was clear consensus that this functionality should be disabled by relays if possible, and disabled by default preferably. And so that's what we've done. There are two new setup parameters that control these filters. There's the max object filter ranges, which is for the object filter, and that's for every single object that comes into the relay. The relay decides whether or not to carry it from its ingress leg to its egress leg by looking at the filter ranges and deciding whether or not they're in range. And so this, if it's omitted, the default is 0, means you don't support any ranges, no filters at all, and so you don't have to support it. It's an easy way for filters, for relays to not have to support this filter by default. The second one is the max track selected. That's for the track selection filter. Again, if the default is 0, you omit it, no filter support, so you don't have to do any track selection filtering as a relay if you don't want to. These parameters are per subscription and for each type of filter. So this is not aggregate capability of all of the tracks that are in play from this connection. It's only for each individual subscription on that connection and for each type of filter. So for example, there are 5 different object filters. You can filter on, group ID, subgroup ID, object ID, priority, and extensions. So each one of those can have this number of ranges. So if you put object filter range, max object filter range is 5, that means you can have 5 object ID ranges, 5 subgroup ID ranges, 5 group ID ranges. So it applies individually to each type of filter and for each subscription. So if the relay wants to have an aggregate capability, it has to compute that aggregate capability from all of the different tracks that it's serving. So it's just something to keep in mind for relay implementers if they want to limit their computational workloads. They may want it to have small numbers in these. This is also independent in each direction. So client and server setup parameters can each include these, and there's not a negotiation of the two sides. They're both declarative. So in client setup, you can set your maxes, and that's for as receiving a subscribe, this is how many filters I can support. So, and again, in the server setup, this is as a server, when I receive a subscription as a server, how many filters can I support? Declarative and independent. All right. Hopefully that part is the easy part. Then on to the filters themselves. This has gone through a lot of different permutations, but this is where we've landed. The object filters are intended to operate in a relay from the ingress leg to the egress leg. You do a quick few checks on the object that comes in and see if any of these filters would apply, and if they do, apply them. They're in almost all of the messages that deal with subscriptions. Fetch is the only exception. We do want it in Fetch, and I'll get to that in the open issues. But the design team came up with a lot of different corner cases. Fetch is like the thorn in everyone's side. It's got a lot of corner cases. And so the thinking was that maybe we'll defer Fetch support until a later PR that better details all of those corner cases. So that's one of the open issues. We'll get to at the end of whether or not we want to continue iterating on this PR until we get Fetch fully fleshed out the way we like, or we support Fetch in a follow-on. But there's 5 new parameters for the 5 new filter types. If you recall, the old design had a single parameter, like a super parameter, with a bunch of operands in it. So we've removed all of that, and now there's going to be 5 new filter types, and all of these filter types are the length-based parameters. So they're not single variants. You have to encode an entire length, and I'll get to why that's relevant later. And they're independent. So you can put a group filter, you can put an object filter, you can put an extension filter. They're all independent of each other. And whenever you apply any of those filters, whenever you specify any of those filters, they're all applied together. So there's no and or any kind of negation or and or anything like that. They're all start and end ranges. You can have multiple start and end ranges. And if you recall, the original design had negation. We don't support negation here. You just put the inclusive range rather than specifying any of the exclusion ranges. The end is optional. So if you want to omit it, you just adjust the length so that there's no end. And that means that it's a shorthand for max end. If you put max variant in the end, it's the exact same thing as omitting the end. The only one that's a little bit unique is the extension filter. The extension filter requires you to specify which extension ID you're filtering on. And so it has not a start and end tuple, but an extension ID start and end tuple. So that's the block that you can repeat. So 3 values that you repeat multiple times to specify different ranges for different extension IDs. So obviously you cannot omit the end if you have multiple of those tuples. So in the extension ID filter, you can also omit the say no end by putting 0 for the end. If you encode a 0 for the end, that's the same thing as saying max variant. So it's just a shorthand again for max variant. And if you're on the very last extension filter, then you can omit the end just like you can in all the other filters, and that also means no end. If you want to remove any of these filters in a subscribe update, you just put the length 0. So that's effectively no ranges. And if you want to update any of the filters at any time, you send a subscribe update with that filter parameter and the full set of ranges. So you're not incrementally adding new ranges with updates. You're specifying the entire set of ranges with every update. So every time you send this parameter, it replaces what the last parameter was on that subscription. Okay, hopefully that's clear for everything. Going on to some examples. So if you recall, the very first iteration of this had, operands and negation, and so people had questions about, okay, well, how do you express the same thing with just these, inclusive ranges. So I just put a little shorthand table on the right here to show, if you wanted to say, one specific value, clearly the start and end is the same. That's the range that you would put. Anything less than the value, less than or equal to the value, you just put the inclusive range 0 to that value. And if you want to go anything greater than or equal to that value, you can omit the end. You say that value with no end. And again, remember, no end is encoded as literally nothing there by reducing the length. If it's at the very end, and if it's an extension ID filter, you could put a 0 there for no end. And of course, between A and B inclusive is just A, B. Between A and B exclusive, these are all integers, so you just +1 -1, and you get what you want. And then again, to drop off the equals, you just do +1 or -1 because these are all integers. And the only thing that people didn't like is to do a negative filter. Say X is not a certain value. You have to actually specify 2 ranges. You have to specify, the before A and the after A range. So that burns 2 ranges instead of 1, but we think that's a lot simpler than having the negation flag and the logic to support that. And a few concrete examples now of how you use this. If you want to to get the video keyframes on a stream, those are object ID 0. So you just do an object filter with whatever the length is, which should be 2 bytes here, and you just put 0, 0. For the video base layer of a stream, whether it's a temporal or spatial base layer, that's the subgroup ID 0. So you just put a subgroup filter with the type that we're going to specify. The length again is going to be 2, and again it's going to be 0, 0. If you want enhancement layers for a video stream, 1 and 3. So example, maybe you have temporal layer 1, and then you also have a temporal layer 3. You have a spatial layer 0 and 2. So you just want those 2 temporal layers to be extracted. Those enhancement layers 1 and 3 would be 2 ranges, 1, 1, and then 3, 3. The extension ID filter takes an additional parameter of the extension ID. So if you want extension ID X with a value greater than or equal to Y and no end, then you just put an extension filter with a length and starting with extension ID X and starting with the value Y and omit the end. The next example is when you have 2 different extension IDs, X1 and X2, and you have 2 different values that you want that value and higher, Y1 and Y2, again, no end. Then again, you put an extension filter and you encode the length. And for the X1 extension ID, you put Y1 and then 0, and you see 0 here is meaning no end. And then you put extension 2, and Y2 start, and then you omit the end. So that's an example of showing how 0 can mean no end and omitting the end can mean no end. And then finally, if you wanted to remove all the extension filters that you've specified, you do subscribe update with an extension filter of length 0. Jonathan?
Jonathan Lennox, I'm confused about the 0 meaning end, because 0 meaning end is also a valid thing to say. I mean, in your example, only wanting keyframes, right?
Yes, let me back up.
So how would you say,
yeah.
I want keyframes with this extension ID?
Yeah, let me back up. So I glossed over this very bottom.
Yeah.
So end equals 0 means no end only if start is greater than 0. So 0, 0 means only just that range. If you had 1, 0, that means 1 to no end.
Okay. That makes sense.
So 0 is only a code point if the start is not 0.
Because there's no point in saying 0 infinity, because that means.
Sorry. Say that again.
Because you wouldn't say 0 infinity. You just say 0 and not leave off the end, right? Is the idea? 0
infinity would be no filter, right? 0 to infinity is the entire space, so it'd be no filter.
Okay.
But we have at the very end, I'll mention a few hacks that code point could mean. But for real uses, you would put no filter if you wanted 0 to infinity, because these are all integers. That's the entire space. Okay. Anything else on the object filter? Hopefully it's clear. Okay, the track selection filter. This is a different type of filter that was newly proposed in Toronto. And this is not just looking at every object that comes in and then forwarding it on or not. This is a filter that's selecting the top n number of tracks in an entire namespace that have the highest values of an extension ID that you specify in the filter. So the purpose of this is to be able to filter a large set of tracks down to the ones that meet a specific criteria for the app. And I'll get to a few examples of those criteria in the next slide. But the key is that this is not something that is, this is not another type of the object filter. This is a totally different filter. And it can also be used with the object filters. When it is used with the object filters run first. So the object filters will whittle down the space, the population of all of the objects that can feed into the track selection filter, and then the track selection filter runs to determine which tracks get forwarded on. So a few examples of this. The motivating use case for the design in the first place was for meetings. If you wanted to only hear the last 4 active speakers in a large meeting of 100 or more participants, where the voice activity is an extension ID that each publisher computes and puts in their objects, then this filter would allow you to pick just those 4. And across the entire relay network, you wouldn't have to send 100 streams anymore. You'd only be sending 4 streams across any relay hop. So it's a lot less traffic, a lot less processing for the relay network at all nodes. So similar examples for things like security cameras. If you had 100 live cameras, you only wanted to monitor the 4 most suspicious. Again, these metrics have to be computed by the publisher. So each camera is computing its own metric in a coordinated way with all the other cameras for that suspicious activity, and putting it into an extension ID that then gets filtered by each relay. Similar thing for viral videos. You could have an upvote extension ID that each publisher is aware of that puts into its objects, and then you could see the top 4 most popular. And this is live. This is happening. As the votes come in, you'll automatically get these streams, bubbling up into your viewport. And it doesn't have to be just audio and video. It could work for any arbitrary data, sensors or telemetry. If you're monitoring a data center, you've got tons of sensors out there. You want to see the 4 hottest. You can extract that. A novel use case that was presented in Toronto was people were struggling with how MOQ works really well for publishing out from one publisher to many subscribers, but aggregating feedback from those subscribers back to the publisher. MOQ doesn't give any tools to help with that flow. So one of the things that were proposed is, well, can you have feedback tracks? Can all those subscribers publish feedback on a track name, maybe somehow suffixed with the publisher's track name? Can all those subscribers send feedback to the publisher? And that may likely overwhelm the publisher if it's a large subscription, right? If you have hundreds or thousands or millions of subscribers, it's unreasonable to expect a single publisher to be able to handle all that feedback. So this track selection filter presents an interesting way to be able to use MOQ in that reverse direction, to allow subscribers to send feedback to a publisher, but then that gets aggregated by the relay network onto only a very small set of signals. If the publisher only wants to see, the top 4 of a certain metric that it's interested in for the feedback, or just one. I just want to know if any one of my subscriber population, has this one signal to send me. You can only ask for the top 1, and the publisher will only get one single signal back, even if the population of subscribers is millions. So, go ahead, Ron. He's in the room somewhere. Yeah.
I'll wait till you get to the end of the slide. Okay.
This one?
All right.
No.
Go ahead. Go back. Yeah. So just wanted to make sure that I understood that that when you set the filter and you say you want X number of whatever, that the
X number of tracks.
X number of tracks
Mhm.
of these particular filter characteristics,
Yes.
that you will receive the corresponding tracks as the server receives them without the receiver having to make adjustments. It's automatically, the filter is automatically done by the relay.
The subscription happens automatically, if that's what you mean. Yes, so you're as a subscriber, if you say a track selection filter for the top 3 in a namespace of 1 million, you don't have to subscribe individually to those 1 million publishers. You just say that one subscription lets you subscribe to all those 1 million publishers, but you're only going to get 3 of them at a time.
And the unsubscribes also happen automatically?
I'll get to that. That's
Okay.
a follow-up point that's still left open.
I'm got a question on this one, if you don't mind. I understand the 100-person meeting through the sensors one pretty well, and I get what the design is doing. I'm somewhat concerned on the feedback tracks that this is creating some privacy considerations that we have not necessarily got an architecture for. Because when you're thinking about the feedback track being aggregated by the relay, in effect, the feedback track is turning the client into a publisher, and the relay now has access to the information sent by the publisher, in this case, the client, to the relay in a mechanism that then gets sent up. And I don't think we have necessarily considered in the architecture what the privacy implications of that are, that the relay now has a view of information it definitely didn't in the downstream direction. Because now, in order to aggregate it, it has to know what the signal is that it's going to be selecting the top of.
Yeah.
So I would strongly suggest that we take that particular piece of protocol mechanics and pull it away from the current version and go back into an architectural question of, if you want feedback to come back, what does that look like? Because I think doing it in a privacy sensitive way would not end up looking like this.
Okay. Yeah, and let me clarify. This is not giving any kind of, there is nothing, feedback is not mentioned in the PR at all. So this construct of, if an application wants to have feedback tracks, and if it wants to aggregate those feedback tracks, this track selection filter provides a mechanism for it to aggregate its feedback tracks. It does not provide any kind of mechanism for feedback tracks in general.
I strongly suggest that rather than starting with this tool, that we start with a question of what does feedback look like here? Does it make the client into a publisher, and the relationship is now that they are a publisher via this relay to a new subscriber, which is the original publisher, or something else? Because
100%
starting
agree.
with this tool is giving you a view of it that's going to result in something that I think has some privacy implications.
100% agree, and there is no consensus in the work group that feedback would work in that way. It was only one person mentioned in one talk that, oh yeah, publishers could also, subscribe to feedback tracks from all of their subscribers, and all the subscribers would publish feedback tracks back towards that publisher.
And
that was just a
if you construct it that
application
way,
thing.
The action of the relay is very, very different than an aggregator, right? Because at that point, it's a relay between a publisher and a client, just like it was before.
Yes.
But it's not an aggregator of data like the top 100 of this.
Yeah.
You can't take the signals from 100 people and boil it into one signal. You could pick the most recent, or some other way of deciding which ones to relay. But I don't think that it can act as an aggregator without a very serious architectural change. And I think we need to think about that.
Yep. All right, so the actual spelling of this, this is in subscribe namespace now, not in regular subscribe or publish OK. This is in subscribe namespace because you're operating over all of the tracks in that namespace. You specify a track selection filter. It's a new parameter. And again, you give the length. and the extension ID that you want to use as the track selector metric. And then how many tracks do you want to select using that metric? When this was first proposed in Toronto, when we had the first design team meeting in Toronto after the regular interim, we gravitated towards defining an extension ID called the track selector so that it would be opaque to the relay network and not leak any information. The relay network would not have any idea if these are voice activities or temperatures or any semantic meaning whatsoever. It's just a track selector that we register. But that would mean that all publishers have to put their metric in this track selector extension ID. And that meant that all subscribers would only be able to select based on that single extension ID. And later meetings, most of the people felt that that was too limiting and it would be better to support any extension ID. So we specify the extension ID now in the parameter. So when you apply this filter, you specify which extension ID you want. We can still optionally register an opaque track selector if we want to. I haven't heard strong consensus one way or the other whether we do that. Or an app can just use the app space. I think we're going to have some space for the extension IDs that's basically for experimental use. You could use one of those and it would basically be opaque to them.
Just a time check. Yeah. We're running out of time. We can run a couple minutes over because we're a little ahead of schedule, but I'd like to save that for discussion.
Yep. Thanks. Okay, so some examples. If you want the top 3 tracks with the highest voice activity, and that happens to be extension ID 87, you just put this track selection filter in with extension ID 87, max tracks 3. Here's an example of combining the track selection filter with the object ID filter. So if you want the 4 highest temperatures, and that's extension ID 91, in certain regions, 20 through 40, and that's a different extension ID, 65, but you only want the tracks to be selected if the temperatures are above 80. You don't care about anything that's lower than that. That's not critical. So you first put an extension filter, which is the object filter, for 65, which is the regions 20 through 40, and temperatures 80 and above. So it's extension ID 91, 80 and above. And then you also apply a track selection filter for the top 4 temperatures in that. Sorry, Jonathan, I couldn't hear.
Is the 91 in the bottom filter a typo?
The 91 is the temperature extension ID.
Oh, I see. It's the temperature.
Yeah. So remember, the track selection filter is you give the extension ID and then max tracks. So 91 is the extension ID, which means temperature, and the 4 is the max tracks. I want 4 of the hottest, the 4 highest temperatures. And remember, the object filters operate first. So first, all of the tracks that don't meet the object filters will not get propagated to the track selection filter. And finally, the track selection filter will run on just the set of tracks that meet it.
Doesn't just a 4 there just mean 4 and above? Didn't you want 4 and below?
The track selection filter is just max tracks. So the track selection filter, you just say, you give a number in, how many tracks do you want? So I want for the temperature extension 91, extension ID 91, I want 4 max tracks.
Okay.
And it's going to pick the highest 4.
Okay.
So the devil is in the details of how you build your selection metric. That metric needs to have what you want to be the highest that gets propagated and selected. Some more details on this. When you get a new track, when a track becomes selected by the relay network because it sees that it has the highest value, you need to know the alias and the full track name for that. And so publish is sent by the relay to deliver those fields. When a track becomes deselected, when it falls out of the selection list, there's a question about whether or not the publisher should send publish done for that. That would be really chatty if the track gets selected, deselected, selected, deselected pretty frequently. So we don't want to send it for every single time. We want to be able to have a mechanism where we can have up to n deselected tracks that stay with their aliases active, and then only after a certain number, then you want to be able to purge that state so it doesn't grow infinitely. So there's an open question about whether or not we have a max tracks deselected parameter as well, or we just default that to the max track selected. So the relay has to keep at most 2 times max track selected list of aliases at any time in its forwarding tables.
People in the queue, but let's please be brief.
Okay, for this track filter, is this mainly for the publisher side or for the subscribe side?
All of the filters are specified by the subscriber, and the relays operate on the published data.
But in that case, there will be so many subscribers. Each subscriber will give you different track filters. So that means the relay needs to handle all kinds of track filters. And
That's right. Every subscriber can have a different set of filters. These filters are per subscription basis.
Okay.
Alan from Dell. I just want to, on deselection, I do think it's really important, but I wonder, we now have the expires field with like a pretty crisp definition. So I almost wonder, when you issue subscribe, can you also give like a default expiration there, which is like somehow tied into, if there's no objects, maybe it's not exactly expires, but you do based on time, essentially. It's like if something got deselected and hasn't been reselected within a certain time period, then you get a publish done for it, something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because also there's an open issue at the very bottom here of the list of deselect idle tracks after some time. So it's not just about the state of the relay growing big because of all these deselected tracks. It's also about, you want to be able to eject someone that puts a very high metric if they haven't put any objects on the wire in a long time. You want to be able to eject them out of there too. So maybe like Alan says, the expiry parameter, which is publisher specific, could be reused, or we could define something in the draft about what the time to live of these decisions are. So all the other open issues remaining for the object filter, the first one, biggest by far, is we want to be able to remove the subscription filter. Everybody hates them. We want to be able to remove them and replace them completely with this mechanism. But there's some nuances that need to be worked out, mostly of how to say next group. The subscription filters currently allow you to say start on the next group boundary. And these filters don't have an easy way to specify that right now. There's some hacky ways we could consider doing it, but we need to close that. And fetch has some specific challenges. You'll have gaps in your fetch streams now. So what do the gaps mean? How do you interpret them? How is a fin or the absence of a fin interpreted? We may avoid specifying the group ID filter until we clarify all the fetch things, or we may try to support all of the fetch right away.
Mo, I'm going to have to ask you, let people read the slide, and I want to have at least a couple of minutes for questions.
Yep.
So
this is the last slide.
Yeah, got it. Zafar, go ahead, and I'm going to close the queue very soon. So please enter the queue if you want to say something.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I just want to ask, is it possible to append to the object filters, or we can set them or delete them? Is there any append operation?
Is it possible to what, the object filters?
Append any filter to the current object filters that you set before.
You specify the entire filter type every time you do an update. So yes, you can change them at any time by just specifying the entire set.
Okay, thanks.
Please be brief.
Yeah. So when you change tracks, are there rules about you have to change at a group boundary, or how does that work? How does that interact with groups? Because presumably you don't only want to start receiving a track at the group boundary.
That's how you construct your metric. You can construct your metric so that it only changes on the group boundary. And there was a question whether or not we recommend that in the draft or whether we leave that to applications.
Okay, so that's a publisher decision. Okay.
Yeah, publisher decision.
Sohas here, not specifically design questions. So on the process question, what do you think should be the next step from here on this one?
I mean, I think the design team should have a follow meeting, and hopefully we can have it during this week. I only heard from Will so far. I'd like to hear others in the design team. If we can meet this week to close. Basically, I'd like to clear out these 6 issues decide whether they're going to be in a follow-on PR or whether we're going to knock them out right now this week, and then get this landed, and then queue up if any of these require follow-on PRs, queue up those PRs.
Hey, Rowan, so my concern was about the interaction of unsubscribe, like if something gets unsubscribed because of the filter, but then I've also subscribed explicitly to the same, like a video track. I subscribed explicitly to like these 8 video tracks, and then I subscribed to a filter that auto-subscribes me to the most active.
Yep.
How do you see that interaction going?
Yes, you're right that there is an interaction between a direct subscription and the subscribe namespace subscription. And we will have text that specifies that you have to have the max tracks in that you specify in your track selection metric has to include all of the pinned tracks that you want individually subscribed also. So if you say, I want the max 3, and I'm also going to directly subscribe to 2 others, you actually have to increase your N to max tracks 5, not 3, because the pinned ones count as selected tracks. Everything in the namespace that gets forwarded to you is considered a selected track.
Okay, thanks, Mo.
What is the conclusion now? What's the next steps?
So the next steps are to hopefully have a design team meeting this week to close on those 6 open issues. We may not close them all directly and put it in this PR. We may decide these are the things which are going to be follow-on PRs, but we would need to make that decision and then propose the current text as is in that PR in 1164.
So the PR should be there soon. Feel free to comment on the PR. You can just send an email to the list if you have more comments about this. Okay, next up is Ian.
They're proposed. Okay. They're substantively different. So we have a number of issues with the ABR tag. This session is explicitly going to be focused on trying to get to a clear resolution or direction on all the open issues. So the hope is to at least come up with a plan to have a plan, for lack of a better word. So like, we can close them. We can decide they're not transport. Oh, thank you. We can go back and write a PR that hopefully will close them. But the intent is to kind of get through all of them in some way, shape, or form and get a clear direction. Some of them have been sitting up there for a while, so that's one reason. Okay. Some observations for both fixed quality ABR and adaptive encoding. Typically, those are last hop sort of things today. Those are typically not done all the way through the relay network. So Warp or another extension in the future could improve ABR if it's not absolutely perfect in MOQT. So I think that's a good takeaway just to keep in mind. Like, I don't want to do a poor job at this point, but like, if it's not perfect, like, it's not going to be perfect, right? Let's just accept that. But like, we should do a good job, but it will get better in the future. The existing design just doesn't do server-side ABR at all. We kind of know this. But yeah, that was the first comment of the YouTube developer I talked to. He was like, there's no way I can do server-side ABR with this thing. And I'm like, I know. He also thought it was a really confusing name. He's like, why don't you call this PubSub Over QUIC? Because this has nothing to do with media whatsoever. And I'm like, oh, that's the warp draft. And he's like, oh, okay. So then he read the warp draft. Anyway, overall, he liked it, but he did find that aspect kind of confusing. Yeah, so let's talk about what belongs where. When going through all these issues, it's helpful to decide like where is the right place for it. So if it's, is it really, really media specific or really, really warp specific, or is it generally useful is one question. And the other question is, if we don't do it at MOQT, is it going to be really, really painful to do it as an extension or in warp? Right, so that latter issue I think informs a lot, is there are some things for which maybe it's kind of media specific, but we really need it. And if we don't do it in transport, it's going to be really annoying, or maybe there are. So those are things to think of when we go through this. Okay. Client-side ABR, track structuring in the future is fairly good. You can also use track and priorities to prefer bandwidth. It's not perfect. There are cases you get extra objects for as much as a round trip time. An approach for track switching was outlined in 1101. It's not the only approach. Where you have a subscription, you get the next group, and then you do subscribe update to end at like whatever group boundary you end up starting at. There are other ways to do this, as I'll go to in a minute. On the server side, at the high level requirements are the server needs to know which tracks are possible. So don't consider AV1 if the client doesn't support it, like so on and so forth. Don't like consider 4K if they have a 1080p viewport, like all those things. The server needs to know the expected bit rates of tracks, or at least without it, it's really dealing with a very difficult problem. Qualities could vary by a lot, like 2 or 3x, or like a little. And then kind of it needs to know where it can switch, what the alignment is, and like how to align them. I'll go over this in a little bit more detail, but I will note that Warp actually does kind of touch on some of these topics, particularly the last one of like when you can switch. So something to consider. All right. Temporal scalability appears to change the approach entirely based on what people I've talked to. I will stop right at this slide. The Meet developers I talked to kind of indicated that because they're heavily reliant on temporal scalability, they're like mostly happy with the current design because like, they're constantly okay with dropping a few frames. It's fine. And they're willing to run like fairly close to the bandwidth limit. The YouTube developers like server-side ABR and have fixed qualities, and those qualities are commonly about 2x off each other. And so as a result, dropping a few frames equals a rebuffer. So they're like much more sensitive to not being quite like on the bleeding edge. And they want to really be sure that they have, say, the 2x bandwidth they need before they go up to the next quality. The Meet folks are sort of like, well, if we lose 20% of our bandwidth, we'll lose like a few frames and move on with our life. And like, we won't even bother really changing what we subscribe to maybe. So that does change the approach a little bit. Really server and client side ABR actually have like fairly different requirements, and the issues are kind of, as you see, kind of broken down into issues for one versus the other. Okay. These are all the issues, just to go over them. I'm going to go over all these in detail, but I just wanted to put them on one slide so you could take a look. Oh, sorry. There's someone in the queue. Lua?
Yeah, here, when you see the server side, does this server mean the relay?
What was the
when
last?
When you see the server side, so does the server means the relay node?
Oh yes, the last hop before the client endpoint or the end subscriber, I think is the term we use in the draft. At least that's what I'm talking about here. So it would typically be relay. Although I guess
so
it wouldn't have to be relay.
Yeah, the relay node is the server, right? They are the same thing.
Yes, they're the ones. They're the publisher is the term in the track uses. Okay. Sorry, in the draft. Yeah. All right. I'm going to start with server-side ABR challenges because they're a little more fun, and I think we're a little bit less likely to get. Here, I'm really looking for direction. We can go into the weeds of some of the other issues in a moment. So obviously, priorities don't do what we want. We had the suggestion in the past of having a group param to group multiple subscribes together. We kind of need the average bit rate to do a good job. Do we want to tackle this? If so, do we want to do it in MOQ? Do we want to do it in Warp? It's kind of similar to subscription filter, but all the proposals, I don't think it actually works in terms of actually solving the same problem. But also, this problem seems a bit probably more tightly scoped than the broadness of subscription filters. So I think, yeah. Clearly, we can write up a PR for this, and it's not going to be an enormous amount of text, right? It's probably going to be a param on subscribe, and maybe a param on the subscribe okay when you get a track about the average bit rate, or somewhere. We'll put that somewhere. So but is it even belong in MOQT? Is this generally useful to applications outside of Warp? No.
Yeah, Mo, we looked at this too in the context of the new object filters, and it seemed like we are pretty close because you can group things on a namespace basis, so you don't need another grouping construct. So if all of your qualities were in a namespace and they were all just different names in that namespace, you could, say the selection metric would be top one, track selection metric would be bandwidth. The challenge is though that each hop would have to extract its local bandwidth out of its sender estimate and somehow insert that into this extension ID for the filter to work. So there were some kind of hokey ways that it could work with the newly proposed track selection filters. Maybe we can talk about the mechanics of and whether or not it's practical to say read your BBR estimate, put it into this extension ID, immutable extension ID.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm happy to follow up offline and just kind of sketch out if we were going to do it that way, like what the best option that we think is at the very least. Sure.
Alan Frindell. So, if it's going to be in Warp, are you assuming that the last mile sender has access to the full catalog? Is that the design? And are there going to be cases where that catalog is end-to-end encrypted so that the last mile sender is some proxy somewhere that can't even read the catalog? Like,
I was not assuming the last mile sender had access to the catalog. That's why I'm saying I would want to put the average track bit rate either in the object params or object extension headers, or like in the track response parameters, or like I would want this to be accessible by the relay. I don't want to assume catalog access. Okay, so
I'm trying to answer your question. Like, do we want this in MOQ or Warp? I'm trying to understand, like, what would it look like if we tried to delegate this completely to Warp?
If you tried to delegate it to Warp, I think it would look the same. It's just like it would be basically an extension, and because you only need to negotiate it like really on the last hop, I would argue, like you can make a hop by hop extension that is negotiated fairly effectively. That's what I'm.
So
that's
I
kind of
guess
the question I'm asking.
your question is different then. Your question is, does it need to be in base MOQ or does it need to be a MOQ extension that
Sure,
either
yes.
Warp defines or is like a separate thing?
Yes,
that
sorry.
Warp negotiates. Okay, so
that is the question I meant.
MOQ needs either in the
Yes,
base or
yes.
in an extension this capability.
Yes. Does it need to be in the base draft? I think is probably a better phrasing of
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
All right, Will's next, then Yequi, and then Suhas.
Yeah, I just want to answer the question, should this be in MOQ or Warp? In my mind, it needs to be in both. We need some binary agnostic means of switching on the publisher's side, and that can be triggered by Warp. Warp understands media. Warp knows the bit rates of all the tracks. It can give instructions. It can call an API on the server to say, switch these tracks at these throughputs. And then the relay can be expected to know media throughput, or it can read extension values coming from the original publisher. It can also follow the instructions coming from the client. But it's the cooperation between the two that I see most effective here. And also, we don't only need to publisher side switch media. We might want to publisher side switch other stuff with our pub sub network. And so like the term ABR is a little restrictive. We should generalize this to publisher side switching.
I have a question on that. Do you have examples of other things you want to do publisher side switching on? Because that was actually, that's an important kind of input into this whole thing.
I can certainly come up with some quite quickly. I don't want to take up mic time, but yeah, there's many use cases as we get into sensors and other objects like that where we would like it to switch, maybe based on position, geo coordinates. If a drone's flying, I just want to see when it's over cities or something like that.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, Kui Wong. So my question is about signal, the average bit rate you're talking about, right? So we had some discussions similar, like if we signal it, for example, in Warp as a catalog field, but then you have a problem that that is part of the payload and relays cannot see them. And how and
are you saying that if I put it as an object extension header, the relay might not be able to see it?
No, I was saying if we put it in, for example, signal that in Warp, right? In the Warp draft, it would typically, for example, it can be signaled as a catalog field, and that would be part of the payload, right? Then the relays cannot see it because our model is that relays don't see payloads. So I mean, just a question on when we're signaling this kind of metadata. Sometimes you think, okay, it's media specific. It might be better in warp and so on. But on the other hand, if we put it in warp and put part of the catalog fields, then our model doesn't allow relays to see it.
Yeah,
So
I think the takeaway is very clearly this needs to be accessible to a standard MOQ relay and not encrypted and not require a catalog and such. So like, I think, yeah, we would, in a PR, that would be clear. And I think as, yeah.
So Hans, rather than making this question about warp versus MOQ, I would say, and what would really be helpful is that spending like offline some time to figure out, what as a subscriber should I express, relate to, act upon, and what as a publisher I need to put in the information. So, and what algorithm that we can define on top of that to make the ABR switching happen. I think if once we define these three properties, then we can decide what part of the spec should define what aspect of that the three parts of the triangle. That would be much useful. That then this question automatically will get answered depending upon where we decide each part would go.
Okay. All right. I think that sounds like we're not gonna. Why don't I try to follow up with folks both about object filters and with like Suhas and others and try to move this forward. But oh, sorry, Victor's in the queue. But it sounds like probably I'm not going to get a clear yes no today.
Yeah, I'm here to do two things. One is the most important, is just regular reminder that this is a Media Over QUIC working group. It's not random data that we do not understand properties of Over QUIC Media working group. And so for ABR specifically what was the publisher side ABR, there are the reason why this fundamentally makes sense is that media has some like predetermined bitrate, and you can somehow, if you can communicate the shape of it, you can switch between three alternatives. And usually you would need, I think, three numbers. You need like to know bit rates of every track. You need to know the group boundaries, and in some cases you would need to know your buffer size. And based on that, you can let the sender, so let the publisher switch between those. But I don't think this is actually similar to subscription filter like ActiveSpeaker at all. Because ActiveSpeaker is based on property of track and the data we publish, but here the switch happens based on the state of individual connection. So and the other difference I noted in chat is that in ActiveSpeaker we can have like 1,000 tracks that are not known in advance, but in case of ABR, we usually know what is in the ladder up front.
Yeah, thanks, Victor, for pointing out the difference between the track property ActiveSpeaker aspect and this is like very much connection local. So that is a good decision. Move on. Keeping subscribes in sync. We kind of talked about this briefly in the past. Warp uses group IDs to keep things in sync. Do we want to do something to keep tracks in sync? If we did so, it seems like it would also be useful for audio and video sync. I can't remember what the current Warp solution is for audio video sync. I don't know if it uses group IDs as well, but obviously, like this is a time-based protocol in some sense. Like things do move forward in time. They're published. So adding a delivery timestamp, not a media timestamp, is not unreasonable. So what I'm asking for here is signal of like, do you want to see a PR on this, or do you want me to not?
Alan Frindell. So I think if you read the details of this issue, it also talks about possible extensions to our current priority scheme that allows you to, if you're delivering multiple tracks which are related in some way, that you don't let one run, even if it has a higher priority, you don't let it run too far ahead of one that is of a lower priority. Right? You don't want to get, 10 seconds ahead or like way too far ahead on audio when there's still video to be delivered or something. So I think that's there. I would like to see a PR, but I think this one is fine to be an extension, or like maybe not even a separate draft. Like what would it look like as a separate draft or an extension rather than something
Well, I
that
could write a PR just to like show what it looked like. But
you could write it as a PR, and then we could say like, great PR,
that's
will
fine.
make an idea out of it. Yeah.
I'm going to move on if there's nothing else. Okay, client-side ABR. Okay, we have two things about bandwidth probing. I have some suggested ways forward. So one is to allow padding streams. Another is just, can we ask a relay to probe? But these issues have been open for quite a while. Today, a subscriber can probe by requesting another track at a lower priority. And it, presumably could be the next highest quality if they wanted to use actual real data. This is not a perfect process, but it certainly is reasonably viable. So given that, do we need more? So we could add a well-known padding track. We could add a parameter to request like extra probe bandwidth on a given subscription. We could have a control stream parameter to request probing. We could also just do nothing. And the other question is, if we do something, again, does this need to be in the core MOQT draft, or like things like a well-known padding track very well could be in, I think, Warp. Maybe the other two, it's more unclear. Guidance on this. I'm personally inclined to do nothing at this point because there are other solutions like going, adding another track and just requesting it at a lower priority. I'm a little bit more concerned about the next issue we're going to discuss, but that's my personal inclination. Alan.
Yeah, just wanted to add, one of my recollections here is that maybe there was some way in which web transport was limited, and so it needed the ability to have padding streams in order to do the probes correctly. Or I didn't reread the issue, but that was like some vague notion. Maybe
Okay.
Victor,
I mean, if you have another,
maybe remember.
Well, there are some things you can't do, but you could just request another track. That clearly like would fly, whether it's pure padding or actual data. Yeah. Colin
Jennings. I mean, I think I'm voting for do nothing here, but it's not quite exactly do nothing. It's like what we need in the base protocol. I don't think we need to do anything in the base protocol. Of course, Warp or something that explains the broader thing might say how it's done in a specific case, but we seem to have so many options that are reasonable, and there's more things beyond this as well.
Okay.
So
yes. Yes. This doesn't talk about FEC. This doesn't. Yes.
Yeah, SCO and everything else. So I sort of lean towards like 4, I guess, as the way moving forward on this draft.
Okay. I mean, we can also mark these as not transport and something like that.
Yeah, Mo, I agree. 4, do nothing until we get something that's interesting in the base in our QUIC transport. If QUIC ends up exposing a mechanism that allows us to know that probe up succeeded and we have 20% more bandwidth, or QUIC adds FEC and we know that we can request FEC from the underlying relays, that's when I think it makes sense to do something more inside of MOQ itself and expose that up to the app. But right now, for today's QUIC, I think we just leave it all up to the app and let it add probing streams and FEC streams if it wants.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it seems pretty clear that you could add a FEC extension that was much more useful than anything I think we're going to come up with today.
I'm going to lock the queue soon. Please be brief.
Oh, Victor.
I am confused by the options presenting on the slides. Mostly because there's 4 of them, and none of them are what we actually do in our implementation. And the first 3 are kind of sound overly complex and not what actually 534 asked for. So what 534 asks for is the feature in which we have a stream type which effectively acts as a discard server, which is to say you send data and this peer just ignores it. And that was kind of similar to padding frames in QUIC. QUIC or like H2, H3. But the reason we needed those at MOQ layer is because in web transport, we can't necessarily send H3 padding or QUIC padding or anything like that. And I think the grand total complexity here is like 10 lines of code, because it is very easy to ignore things. But yeah.
Hey, Luo, very quickly.
Okay, a quick, maybe basic question. So in the previous slides, in the ABR, we're talking about the sync between video and audio. So my question is, for the in the same namespace, is the group ID required to be synced between the different tracks?
That's currently a warp kind of requirement, but that's not an MOQT requirement. There's no synchronization currently in MOQT.
Okay, thanks.
Ian, quickly, please.
Yep. Bandwidth discovery. Should a priority indicate less than best effort, or another way? I mean, really, the broader issue is: should there be a way to say, don't use up all the peers' bandwidth on this one subscription because it's not high enough priority. Like, I want you to drop this. So this can be particularly relevant in cases where you have, say, like 2 tracks, and when an iframe comes along for the higher priority track, you really, really want to get the iframe through fairly quickly, and you don't want to fill up your entire pipe and potentially cause buffer bloat with the second track. So we can specify one or more of the priorities as less than best effort. We can add a headroom param or some other variation on subscribe that basically says, reserve the last X bytes of congestion window, or the last X% of bandwidth, or something like that. Like, don't utilize that for this particular subscription. So like, say you knew your iframes were going to be 16K, then you could say, like, okay, don't use the last 16K of the congestion window, because that will guarantee that, like, when an iframe pops in, like, it'll always be able to be sent, something like that. Or we could do nothing. This one is a little harder to add later, but it still could be an extension. So I know Victor's hit something like this recently, but I'm not sure if you have an opinion, Victor. Oh, Mo, go for it.
Echoing my last comment, if we had an underlying mechanism in QUIC to let us do it, if BBR could say, for this traffic, I want to go leadbat mode, not BBR 3.3.
Right.
But if we don't have that, then we do nothing. So unless we have underlying mechanisms that actually can guarantee lower than best effort, I wouldn't try to get something like this in.
I mean, the headroom thing, I mean, you could do it like, if available CUEND, like greater than X, then
that requires you to have a BBR, have a QUIC stack that supports that specific congestion control bypass, right?
I think even web transport exposes congestion window, right? Yes, it does, and certainly our stack does. Yeah, I think getting the congestion window is one of the few things you probably actually will get the right value. Bandwidth, who knows what you'll get, but congestion window, I'm pretty sure it'll be right.
All right, we have to take this offline.
Okay,
Victor, you have 30 seconds.
Oh, awesome.
Victor, he's gone. Christian, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, and one thing I worry about that is priority inversion, is that your available window fluctuates with time. So if you have a window that is kind of over large for one RTT, and you stuff it with a low priority big frame, then it blocks the queues and goes next. So this is a very complex subject. I'm not sure we should standardize it right now.
That's okay.
Okay, great. Thank you for the comment. This is the last slide. Just please, all these slides have linked issues in them. Please continue the discussion there. And Will is up. So let me just call up his slides. I can find them. Everyone's favorite topic, advertising. Go, Will.
Yeah, so thank you. There's no ways I can cover the complexity of advertising in 6 minutes here. So this pitch is really just trying to motivate that we can spend at least an hour or an hour and a half on this subject at the Boulder hybrid interim. Next slide. while it's switching. Why do we care about advertising in MOQ-T, right? MOQ-T, we just said, is an agnostic pub-sub protocol. It doesn't know it's delivering ads. It doesn't care. I'm
Use
not
slide
seeing
control,
any
Will.
slides here. On my side, I'm still seeing the first slide.
All right, that's not
Hey, I
working
got a
out.
really high level question for you, Will, but before you jump it in. So on your take, having done this, when we get to that hour-long conversation, do you think we need changes in MOQ-T to support the ad insertion? Or are you going to be, we think we could build it above that? What's the...
Well, if we go to my very last slide, I answered that exact question, Colin.
Awesome.
So let me just fly through this, and then I'm going to answer Colin's question, which is probably the question we're all asking. So why are we talking about this? There's 4 major ways we can do advertising. I spent some time making nice diagrams here. I don't have time or the capability to walk you through them quickly, but client-side ad insertion is the traditional way. The client subscribes to video and audio tracks. It fetches ad tracks. It uses an external source, a vast server or an ad decisioning server that might be HTTP or might be MOQ, telling it when to insert these ads. And it usually detects markers in band in the track, like Scuddy markers, that give it the trigger at which to embed the ad. So that's client-side ad. Next slide. With server guided, the client can actually subscribe to an ad insertion track, which I show in blue. And this track is constantly updating to say, I want you to insert this ad at this time, this ad at this time. So as you go through a live sports event, for example, and you go to ad break, you'll get a dynamic insertion. The client is then following the instructions, so the server is guiding it. It fetches the ad tracks and the client displays them. It typically has 2 rendering services, one for the primary contract, which it continues subscribing to, and then for the ads, which it displays for the ad time. This is also the trend that both the data segmented media is moving towards, to interstitials in HLS and also dynamic manifests in Dash. Next slide. So if we want to be compatible with the industry, we should certainly be supporting server guided. Server side, there's 2 flavors. The one traditional, what I'm calling an application relay server, because it's actually modifying content here. It's going to mix ad content into your primary content as it's delivering to you. So the client doesn't have to do anything. It's pure server side. And this is also quite traditional for segmented media as well. But clearly it needs a functionality outside of a pure relay server. Next slide. There's another variant on server side, which I'm calling Luke's sequence in flavor of a better name. Basically, it's the client has given the primary content, but only a little blob. So it gives it a bit of a live stream, but then that stops and it says, okay, now you must go and play an ad. Client plays the ad, and only after the ad walk clock time has elapsed or just before the end of it, it tells the client what the name of the next piece of live content is. So it's constantly mutating that, and it's forcing the client either to display the ads or at least to display nothing for the duration of the ads. So that's another option with server-side ad insertion. Next slide. I put everything in a table here, looking at some key metrics like what's the resistance to ad blockers, type of seamlessness, and the ability to target and personalize. All 3 of these schemes allow per session targeting, which is really what we want to do for maximum CPM. Last slide. This, I think, is the most important one. So for client-side ad insertion, I believe we can do it with the existing APIs. No changes required to MOQ-T. For server-guided ad insertion, same thing. I believe we can do it with no changes required to MOQ-T. Server-side, we need to do 2 things. One, we need to add the notion of an application relay, one that does modify track content based upon some external configuration. And then secondly, we want to leverage that external configuration to create some means where we can substitute content from one track into another. And that generic capability would allow us to do that server-side insertion that I spoke of, and perhaps there's other applications outside of advertising. This is not a client, this is not an MOQ-T message, a control message, right? This is an API that some local code on the relay is going to run in, because you can't rely on the client doing this. We want to execute it on the server. So we would need to discuss what this looks like. But that, I believe, are the changes necessary for MOQ-T. I can go to questions.
Very well done, Will. Thank you for being concise. I'm going to take 5 minutes of your lunch so we can have a little discussion here. Thanks.
Alan Frindell. So I think in this last thing, the idea of an application relay being the last mile, I don't know that we need, right? Like pursuant to modularity, like you can build something that speaks MOQ-T, and as long as you don't claim to be a capital R relay, you can do whatever you want. But I think it's really important that we maintain the property that two subscribers that are subscribed to the same track are getting the same content, which means as long as these end subscribers have some sort of way to identify them, something to the track that they subscribe to is unique, then it's fine to have an application server which is stitching in, mixing content, which is shared content and custom content, and then producing this unique track. But I think it's really like, we don't want to mess with the caching properties, because if there's another cache that's between them, that would be my concern.
I agree. When you do personalization, I subscribe to track A with ID 123. You subscribe to track A with ID 234. You and I might get different ads in our content if we're doing server-side switching. We're both going for track A, but we're giving different parameters to this publisher, and this publisher's inserting different content.
Yeah, so I think in that case, I would say the tracks have to have different names. Like ID 123 has to be part of the name of the track. So
well, as long as we regard the name as the combination of some sort of ID, right? Yeah. So yes, they have to be different. Otherwise, we break a fundamental property.
Mo, just plus one to Alan, that this is not an app relay, this is an app server. And we do the same thing in meetings too. We'll have an app server that has a co-located relay, but when things are fundamentally writing in new tracks or mutating the objects of a track, that's fundamentally an app server, not a relay. And to avoid changing all the properties of MOQ-T that we've agreed on, it's much easier just to have that as a server out of the scope of MOQ-T and author new tracks, publish new tracks out of that are the composed add inserted tracks.
I agree with you. I'm perfectly fine with application server. The real question we want is, do we want to standardize what this application server can do so that implementers can get reliable behavior or add insertion behavior out of it? That's the question for the work group.
All right, well done, everyone. Staying almost on time. We're only 1 minute late, and we will see you all Thursday. Thank you to Yequi and Emily for taking notes.
I saw the issue. I put it in the chat.